The HOA destroyed my legal seawall for ruining the view, and then watched a tsunami drag their million-dollar homes into the ocean. One minute, I had a permit-approved wall my family built for safety. The next, the HOA president showed up with fake cops and a forged city order to demolish it. She laughed as they took sledgehammers to the only thing protecting the bluff, all so she could have a prettier picture for her real estate photos. But what she didn't know was that I had already uncovered the real reason she wanted that wall gone, a secret plan that was about to make the ocean her worst nightmare. When nature is about to serve the coldest revenge imaginable, do you warn the people who tried to ruin you? Or just let the cameras roll? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because what happens next is pure justice. The California sun always hit my kitchen window around 7 a.m., casting long shadows across the plans I still kept pinned to a corkboard. They were the original schematics for my seawall, drawn up right after the big coastal storm of 2009. My wife, Martha, had been terrified by that storm. Water had crept right up to our back patio, and for 3 days, the sound of the ocean wasn't a comfort. It was a threat. So, I did what an old marine engineer does. I designed a solution. I got the permits from the city, hired the best local crew, and oversaw every single pour of concrete, every single length of rebar. It wasn't just a wall. It was a promise to Martha that she would always be safe here. After she passed, that wall became more than just protection. It was a monument to doing things the right way, to building something that lasts. I'd start my mornings with a cup of coffee, looking out at the calm Pacific, and feel a quiet sense of peace. That peace ended on a Thursday. There was something alien on my front gate, a flash of red plastic, cinched tight with a zip tie. It was a final HOA violation notice. The paper was still damp from the morning mist. In thick, aggressive letters, it said my seawall was in breach of community aesthetic standards for blocking shared ocean views. At the bottom, a figure that made my stomach turn. A fine of $14,200, payable in 30 days. Shared views. My house sat at the end of the bluff line. The only view it blocked was the one from the community president's second-story patio, 2 houses down. My heart wasn't pounding. It went cold and steady. Anger for me isn't hot. It's a slow, quiet burn that focuses the mind. I didn't tear the notice down in a rage. I carefully clipped the zip tie with wire cutters, carried the paper inside, and laid it flat on my desk. Then I walked to my filing cabinet, the same one I used for 40 years of engineering projects, and opened the drawer labeled H. Under Home, I pulled out a thick folder marked Seawall Construction, 2009. Inside, protected in plastic sleeves, was everything. The original city permits with the official raised seal, the signed approval from the Planning Commission, my stamped and dated architectural plans. I even had the canceled checks I'd used to pay the contractors. I put all of it into my old leather briefcase and walked down the street to the HOA Community Clubhouse, a building that always smelled faintly of chlorine and stale coffee. Karen Duvall, the HOA president, was holding court behind a cheap particle board desk. She was a woman of 58 who wore blazers like armor and wielded her power with the smug certainty of a petty tyrant. She loved rules, especially the ones she made up on the spot. I waited patiently until she was finished dressing down another resident about the unauthorized color of his mailbox. Then I stepped forward. "Karen," I said, my voice even. "There seems to be a mistake." I opened my briefcase and laid the documents out on her desk, one by one. The city permit on top. She didn't even glance down. She just smiled. A thin, tight-lipped expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Frank, there's no mistake," she said, her tone dripping with condescending sweetness. "We have new aesthetics guidelines. That unsightly fortification of yours is no longer in compliance. I pushed the signed city permit a little closer to her. This is a legal, city-approved structure, Karen. It was built for storm surge protection. Your guidelines don't supersede city law. She finally looked at the paper, then back at me, and let out a small, dismissive laugh. Those are old papers, Frank. This is HOA policy now. You have 30 days. She gestured to the door. Her secretary, Ann Lasky, a woman who seemed to get all her life's joy from other people's misery, was already smirking at me from the corner. The meeting was over. I packed my documents back into my briefcase, the leather creaking in the silent room. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a threat. I had presented facts, and they had been rejected with a smile. I knew then this wasn't about a view. It was about power, and she had just declared war. The next few days were quiet. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, citing the relevant state laws and attaching certified copies of my permits. I sent it via registered mail. I thought the system would work. I believed that rules and evidence mattered. That belief shattered the following Tuesday at 8:15 a.m. The low rumble of a heavy-duty truck shook the coffee cup on my table. I looked out the window and saw a demolition crew parked on the street. 2 men were unloading sledgehammers from the back. Another was unrolling a set of blueprints on the hood of the truck. I walked outside, my heart now a cold, hard knot in my chest. A man in a high-visibility vest with decon demolition, stenciled on the back, intercepted me before I could reach the street. "Morning, sir. We've got an emergency removal order for a seawall at this address." He handed me a clipboard. The paper on top was an official-looking document with the city's logo at the top. It spoke of an imminent structural risk and authorized immediate demolition. But something was wrong. The font on the main text was slightly different from the font used in the city letterhead. The seal in the corner wasn't raised. It was flat, a color photocopy. It was a forgery, and a bad one at that. As I stood there, frozen, I saw Karen Duvall's car pull up across the street. She got out, arms crossed, a victorious smirk plastered on her face. The first sledgehammer hit my wall. The sound of it, a dull, sickening thud, was the sound of everything I believed in being smashed to pieces. That first hammer strike broke something inside me. Not my spirit, but my faith in procedure. I started walking toward the crew, my hand held up. "Stop this work," I said, my voice low but carrying over the grinding of their equipment. "You are on private property, and that demolition order is a fake." The foreman, a man built like a refrigerator, just grunted and motioned toward his security. That's when I met Officer Dale. He was a man, in his late 40s, poured into a black tactical uniform that was a size too small. A cheap, homemade-looking badge was pinned to his chest, reading, HOA Enforcement. He stepped in my path, planting his feet wide. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your residence," he said, puffing out his chest. "This is an official HOA operation." I looked him square in the eye. "You're not a police officer. You're private security. You have no authority on my property." His face hardened. "I have the authority Karen Duvall gives me." From across the street, Karen must have seen I wasn't backing down. She pulled out her phone and started a loud, theatrical performance. "Yes, 911. I need help. There's an elderly gentleman here. He's threatening workers. He's becoming very aggressive. Please, send someone quickly." It was a masterful lie, designed to paint me as an unhinged old man. 15 minutes later, a real sheriff's patrol car rolled up. 2 deputies got out, calm and professional. They listened to Karen's frantic story. Then they came over to me. I explained the situation simply. I showed them my original city-stamped permits. "That's my legally constructed seawall," I told them. "Her order is a forgery." The senior deputy took my documents and then walked over to Karen, who handed him her fake emergency order with a flourish. He looked from one paper to the other, his brow furrowed. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, he came back to me. and his face was tired. "Sir," he said, handing my permits back, "I can see you have a legitimate disagreement here. But from our perspective, this is a civil matter. It's her hired crew on what she claims is community-managed land. We can't adjudicate property law on the side of the road. As long as you don't threaten anyone, and they don't come onto your patio, we can't get involved. You'll have to take it to a judge." He was polite, but his message was clear. They weren't going to help me. The law, in this moment, was useless. Karen watched them leave with a look of pure triumph. With the real police gone, she was back in charge. She nodded, and the crew started up again. This time, her secretary, Ann Lasky, stepped forward, holding a 3-ring binder like a holy text. She flipped to a tabbed page and began reading in a loud, nasal voice. As per the revised HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section B. Any structure deemed to impede the scenic easement can be removed without homeowner consent following a final notice period. She looked up at me over her glasses, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "You should have attended the bylaws meeting, sir." That was the moment everything shifted. The anger in my chest didn't vanish, but it cooled and solidified into something else. Purpose. Arguing was a waste of breath. Shouting would only feed their narrative. They wanted a fight. I was going to give them a clinical analysis. I stepped back onto my lawn, took my phone out of my pocket, and pressed the record button. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my hands steady, and documented the destruction. I filmed them taking crowbars to the concrete joints I had carefully sealed. I zoomed in as they ripped out the rebar, noting how it was bent and torn, compromising the integrity of what was left of the bluff's footing. I recorded the chunks of poured concrete tumbling down onto the beach below, exposing raw earth to the open air. Most importantly, I filmed them obliterating the integrated drain slope, the crucial feature designed to channel rainwater away from the cliff face to prevent erosion from above. They weren't just removing a wall. They were actively destabilizing the land my house and their houses were built on. They were creating a problem 1,000 times worse than an ugly wall, and I had it all on high-definition video, time-stamped and crystal clear. For 2 hours, I stood there, a silent witness. When they were done, my yard was a wasteland of broken concrete and scarred dirt, fully exposed to the sea. Karen gave me one last, victorious look before getting in her car and driving off. The fake cop, Dale, lingered for a second, then seemed to realize how ridiculous he looked standing there all alone, and he too departed. My home was vulnerable. My property had been violated. And I had never felt calmer. I walked back inside, past the window that now had a brutally unobstructed view of the ocean, and went straight to my office. I didn't bother looking at my physical files anymore. They dealt in paper, in lies and forgeries. I was going to deal in data. I powered on my old Dell laptop. It was slow to boot up, but it was reliable. I opened a web browser and my fingers typed a familiar acronym, NOAA. The website for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration loaded. I wasn't looking for HOA bylaws. I was looking for tide charts, historical storm surge maps, and recent Pacific deep ocean quake reports. They thought this was a fight about a wall. They had no idea it was about to become a lesson in coastal geology. They had taken away my wall, but they had given me something far more valuable, a single piece of paper. Their entire case was built on that forged document, and they were banking on the assumption that I was just an old man who wouldn't know how to look closer. They were wrong. My first step was to digitize everything. I used my flatbed scanner to create high-resolution images of their fake removal order and my authentic, city-issued permits from 2009. I opened both files on my large computer monitor, side by side. To a casual observer, they looked similar. But to an engineer who spent a lifetime reading blueprints and official documents, the forgery screamed its incompetence. It started with the city seal. Theirs was a flat, slightly blurry image. Mine, when I zoomed in, showed the subtle indentation and crisp edges of a physical embosser. It was a small detail, but in legal documents, small details are everything. Then I examined the text. The font the city used for official notices was Times New Roman. The body of their document was in Calibri. It was a tiny difference, but it was like a signature. It showed the document wasn't generated by the same system. The biggest mistake, however, was the title block at the bottom. It listed the Department of Coastal Planning. The city had renamed that the Office of Coastal Management back in 2015. They had used an outdated template. These were all good solid points for a lawyer. But I needed something undeniable. I needed to know who made it. Most people don't realize that PDF files carry a hidden history. It's called metadata, the digital fingerprint that tells you about a file's origins. I opened the properties of their forged PDF. Under the Details tab, I found it. Creator Software, Microsoft Word, 2016. That was my first clue. The city used a specialized government software suite, not a commercial word processor. Then, I saw the line that made my breath catch. Author, Alasky. My mind raced. Ann Lasky, Karen's smug secretary, the one who read the bylaws to me as my wall was being torn down. She had created the document. She hadn't even bothered to scrub her own name from the file. I felt a cold wave of satisfaction wash over me. This was the proof. This was the nail. I saved a screenshot, my mouse clicking with quiet finality. But I wasn't done. I picked up the phone and called the city clerk's office. I gave the clerk the reference number from Karen's document. I just need to verify the approval time for this emergency order, I said calmly. She put me on hold for a moment, and I could hear her typing. Sir, I'm sorry, she said, her voice full of confusion. There's no order with that number. And according to this, the timestamp for approval is 6:45 p.m. on a Friday. Our office closes at 5:00 p.m. This document isn't in our system. It doesn't exist. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. I had it all. The physical inconsistencies, the digital author, and the official confirmation that the whole thing was a lie from start to finish. I didn't storm into the HOA office. That's what they would expect. Instead, I composed a simple email to Karen, Ann, and the entire HOA board. The subject line was, Request for clarification on forged demolition order. In the body, I calmly laid out the facts, point by point. I attached the screenshot of the metadata showing Ann's name. I noted the call with the city clerk's office. I asked for an immediate cessation of all actions against my property and full reimbursement for the damages, pending a criminal investigation into the forgery. I hit send and waited. Karen's reply came 2 hours later. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Frank, it began, we are concerned about these baseless and defamatory accusations. Our legal counsel has reviewed the order and finds it to be completely valid. We consider this matter closed. Please be advised that continuing to make such frivolous claims will result in additional fines for harassment of the board. She was doubling down. They were so arrogant, they thought they could simply lie their way out of it. They didn't know I wasn't fighting them anymore. I was simply collecting data for the real battle to come. I decided it was time to move this fight out of the shadows of email and into the light. I took the video I had recorded of the demolition and edited it into a simple 3-minute clip. No dramatic music, no angry narration. I started with a clear shot of my city-stamped permits, then cut to the demolition. I used simple text overlays to point out the fake city seal on their order, the different fonts, and a summary of my call with the city clerk. I ended the video with a single question. Is this justice? I uploaded it to a public video site and posted a link on the local town forum and the neighborhood's unofficial Facebook group. I shut my computer down and went to make dinner. The next morning, my video had 4,000 views. The comment section was a firestorm of outrage from my neighbors. People were tagging local news reporters. The fortress of lies Karen had built was starting to crack. That evening, as I was washing my dishes, there was a quiet knock on my back door. It was my neighbor, George, a retired accountant who usually kept to himself. He looked nervous, holding a plain manila envelope in his hand. "Frank," he whispered, looking over his shoulder, "I saw your video. They did the same thing to me last year over my fence. Bullied me until I paid." He pushed the envelope into my hand. This was slipped out of Karen's office. "I think you need to see it. Just don't say it came from me." He scurried off before I could say thank you. I went back to my desk and opened the envelope. Inside was a confidential memo from a real estate development firm to Karen. It detailed a proposal to convert 5 cliffside properties, including her own, into high-end, short-term vacation rentals. It spoke of maximizing ocean view assets and listed projected nightly rates that were astronomical. And there, in the final paragraph, was the reason for all of this. It stated that the project's viability depended on the removal of any view-obstructing structures, specifically mentioning the aging seawall at the end of the bluff line. My wall. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was never about the view. It was about greed. They destroyed my property and endangered the entire bluff, not for a prettier picture, but for a bigger paycheck. The memo didn't make me angry. It made me sad. It was one thing to be bullied by someone for a sense of petty power, but it was another to realize they were willing to put people's homes at risk just to make a few extra dollars from tourists. The forgery and the demolition were the crime. This memo was the motive. My video had raised questions, but Karen Duvall was an expert at deflecting questions with insults and procedure. I knew my word against hers would become a stalemate. I needed a voice that couldn't be dismissed as bitter or emotional. I needed an expert. I spent the next morning researching independent structural engineers in Southern California who specialized in coastal geology. I made a list of 3 firms, but it was the 4th name that caught my eye. Anita Ramos. Her website was simple, no frills, filled with project photos of retaining walls, flood barriers, and foundation repairs. She didn't have testimonials from happy homeowners. She had case studies with data. I called her office and she answered the phone herself. Ramos Engineering. I explained my situation in the same calm, factual tone I had used with the sheriff. I told her about my permitted wall, the illegal demolition, and my concerns about bluff stability. She was quiet for a long moment when I finished. "Mr. Keller," she said finally, her voice crisp and direct, "I don't get involved in HOA politics. My fee is $300 an hour, including travel time. I will assess the site, I will analyze the data, and I will write a report based on the facts. The facts might not be what you want to hear. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," I said. "When can you be here?" Anita Ramos arrived the next afternoon in a dusty Ford pickup truck. She was in her early 50s, with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a no-nonsense expression that seemed permanently fixed to her face. She wasn't interested in a tour of my home. She walked straight to the backyard and stood at the edge of the newly exposed bluff, her hands on her hips. For a full 10 minutes, she just looked. She looked at the exposed soil, the fresh cracks in the earth, the pile of debris at the bottom of the cliff. She walked the length of my property line, then looked down the coast at the neighboring homes. Finally, she turned to me. "Where's your water shut-off?" It wasn't the question I was expecting. I showed her. She took out a set of tools and spent the next hour conducting soil density tests and taking measurements with a laser distance meter. She was all business, her movements efficient and precise. She photographed every crack, every exposed pipe, every angle of the damage. When she was finished, she packed her tools and we sat down at my kitchen table. She pulled out a tablet and brought up a series of geological maps overlaid with her site photos. "Okay, Frank," she said, dropping the formal Mr. Keller. "Here's the problem in plain English. That seawall wasn't a fence. It was the anchor for this entire section of bluff. She pointed to a diagram on her screen. It did two things. It deflected wave energy at the base, and it provided a counterweight that stabilized the upper soil layers. When they ripped it out, they didn't just remove a wall. They destabilized the entire bluff. It's like pulling the bolts out of a load-bearing beam. The whole structure is now compromised. She zoomed out on the map and drew a red line encompassing 5 properties, starting with mine. Based on the soil composition and the current erosion patterns, any significant storm surge will now undercut the bluff right here. Her finger tapped the screen directly on the foundation of Karen Duval's house. Your property will probably get washed out, but because of your old drainage slope, you might be okay. But hers, and the 2 beside it, they'll be the first to go. Their foundations will have nothing underneath them. She said it with no malice, no satisfaction. It was a simple statement of engineering fact. I'm filing an official report of my findings with the City Planning Office and sending a copy to your HOA board, she said, packing up her tablet. This is now a formally documented risk. They are legally obligated to address it. A week later, there was a mandatory HOA meeting. I went, not to speak, but to watch. The room was tense. My video was the elephant in the room. Karen started the meeting with a bright, false smile. She saved me for the grand finale. And finally, she announced, holding up a copy of Anita's report as if it were a dirty napkin, I want to address Mr. Keller's campaign of misinformation. She held the document aloft. He has hired a woman, an engineer named Anita Ramoses, she said, deliberately mispronouncing the name, to write this very scary, very expensive story. She claims our entire community is about to fall into the ocean because we removed one ugly concrete wall. Someone in the audience laughed nervously. Karen beamed. Let me be clear, she continued, her voice dripping with scorn. This isn't a FEMA zone. She's fear-mongering to justify a paycheck. This board will not be intimidated by bitter residents and their hired guns trying to scare us into spending a fortune to rebuild his eyesore. She tossed the report onto the table. The meeting ended with scattered applause from her supporters. I walked out without a word. They had been given a professional, factual warning, and they had laughed at it. That night, I sat at my desk, looking out at the dark, calm ocean. I checked my usual news sites, then scrolled over to the NOAA homepage out of habit. A new bulletin had been posted just an hour before. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake had occurred deep in the Pacific, off the Aleutian Islands. It wasn't big enough for a major tsunami warning, but the final line of the alert sent a chill down my spine. A Level 1 storm surge advisory is in effect for the entire West Coast. Abnormal tidal fluctuations and strong coastal currents are expected to arrive in approximately 48 hours. The ocean was about to get a vote. The NOAA advisory wasn't a Hollywood-style warning. It was dry, full of meteorological jargon about tidal surges and low-pressure systems. But I understood the language perfectly. The ocean, which had been a gentle neighbor for decades, was about to become an active threat, and Karen Duval had personally dismantled our only defense. My anger had cooled into a single, sharp point of focus: documentation. I was done trying to persuade them with words. From now on, I would only speak with data. I went online and ordered 2 weatherproof, motion-activated security cameras and a third designed for time-lapse photography. They arrived in 2 days. I spent an afternoon setting them up. One was mounted high on the corner of my house, aimed directly at the fresh, raw cliff face where my wall used to be. The second I disguised in a birdhouse, positioning it to get a clear shot of the foundations of the 3 houses most at risk, Karen's and her 2 neighbors. The third, the time-lapse camera, I placed on my back patio, setting it to take a single photograph every 10 minutes, day and night. My goal was simple: to create an unblinking, unbiased record of what they had done. I didn't have to wait long. For the first week, nothing much happened. Then, the first winter rain came. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, day-long drizzle. Before, the water would have been channeled away by my wall's drainage system. Now, it soaked directly into the exposed soil. My motion camera caught the first small event at 3:17 a.m. A section of dirt the size of a suitcase simply sloughed off the cliff face and tumbled to the beach below. A few days later, a new crack appeared. A thin, spidery line running parallel to the edge of the bluff, right behind Karen's prize-winning rose bushes. The time-lapse footage was even more damning. When I compiled the photos from the first 3 weeks, I could see the bluff breathing. It seemed to sag and shrink with every tide. The grass at the edge was slowly disappearing, millimeter by millimeter, into the void. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, deliberate execution, and my cameras were the only witnesses. The evidence was undeniable, so I made it public. I created a second video. This one was even simpler than the first. I showed a side-by-side comparison, a photo of the bluff from a month ago, solid and secure behind my wall, next to my time-lapse footage showing the steady erosion. I watermarked the video with the date and time in the corner of the screen. I posted it to the same local forums. This time, Karen's response was swift and official. I received a letter via courier from an expensive-looking law firm. It was a cease and desist order. It accused me of unauthorized media recording and targeted harassment of the HOA president. It claimed my cameras were an invasion of privacy and demanded their immediate removal. The letter threatened legal action and more fines if I did not comply within 24 hours. They thought a lawyer's letterhead would scare me. Instead, it was a gift. I scanned the letter, attached it to an email with a link to my new video, and sent it to a reporter at the local newspaper who had been following the story on the community forums. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, and she called me less than an hour later. She wasn't interested in the HOA's rules. She was interested in Anita Ramos's professional report and my time-lapse evidence of a potentially catastrophic bluff failure. The story ran 2 days later, on the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline was simple and direct. Retired engineer warns of HOA disaster, cites forged documents, and imminent bluff collapse. The article included a picture of me standing by the ruined bluff, a screenshot from my erosion video, and a direct quote from Anita's report. It laid out the facts, the forgery, the financial motive from the rental memo, and Karen's cease and desist letter. My private little war was now very, very public. This forced Karen to call another emergency HOA meeting. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was completely different this time. It wasn't just me against them anymore. The room was packed, and the faces in the crowd were etched with concern, not deference. Karen stood at the front, but her usual confidence was gone. She was on the defensive. She held up the newspaper, her hand trembling slightly. "This is a new low," she said, her voice strained. "Mr. Keller is now using the media to attack our community, to spread panic and fear. He's just bitter because his ugly wall was removed. He is trying to hurt our property values with these paranoid fantasies." But the words didn't land the same way. When she finished speaking, there wasn't applause, just an uncomfortable silence. A woman from the back of the room stood up. "Karen, what about the engineer's report? Is it true that the bluff is unstable?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "A baseless opinion from a hired gun." "And the forged city order?" another man called out. "My sources at the city are looking into it," she lied, her voice cracking. The crowd was turning on her. They saw the evidence, and they saw her flailing attempts to deny it. For the first time, she had lost control of the room. I felt a small, quiet sense of vindication. It wasn't over, but the truth was finally winning. I went home that night, feeling like a heavy weight was beginning to lift. I sat at my desk, reviewing the footage from my cameras. At 10:23 p.m., the normal rhythm of the quiet suburban night was broken. A new sound pierced the air. It started low, a distant moan, then grew into a full-throated wailing siren coming from the Coast Guard station down the bay. My phone buzzed on the desk. Then my television screen flashed with a red banner, Emergency Alert System. The automated voice was stark, stripped of all emotion. A tsunami warning has been issued for this coastal area. A Category 2 surge event is imminent. All residents in low-lying areas are ordered to evacuate to higher ground immediately. Estimated time of wave impact: 2:40 a.m. I looked at my camera feed, at the dark, placid water. In 4 hours the ocean was coming to collect its due. The siren's wail cut through the night for a full 15 minutes before falling silent, leaving an eerie, ringing stillness behind. Panic erupted on the neighborhood Facebook group. People were asking if it was a false alarm, if they should evacuate, if anyone knew what was happening. Karen Duvall, of all people, posted a calming message: "Please everyone, remain calm. This is likely a level 1 advisory, which usually means some high tides. There is no need for alarm." She was a real estate developer in the making, protecting her investment from a panic sell-off. I didn't bother to correct her. There was no point. You can't argue with an earthquake. I didn't evacuate. My house sits on a solid foundation, further back from the bluff's edge than the newer homes. My concern wasn't for my own safety. It was for the integrity of the data. I made a fresh pot of coffee, opened the feeds from my 3 cameras on my largest monitor, and sat down at my desk to watch. For the next few hours, everything was deceptively normal. The ocean looked like it always did at night, a vast, black emptiness. The only sign of trouble was that the tide seemed to be pulling out, and out, and out, exposing a stretch of beach I hadn't seen in years. It was like the ocean was taking a long, deep breath. At 3:12 a.m., 32 minutes later than the estimate, it exhaled. It wasn't a single towering wave like in the movies. It was a surge, a relentless and horrifying rise of the sea itself. The water didn't crash. It climbed. It swallowed the beach, then the rocks. Then it began to claw its way up the face of the bluff. On my monitor, I watched the feed from the camera pointed at Karen's foundation. The water, thick with sand and debris, slammed into the base of the raw, exposed earth. It tore at the soil with a fury I had only ever seen in engineering simulations. The first part of the bluff to go was a section right where my wall's central anchor had been. A huge chunk of earth, weakened by the rains, simply dissolved into the churning water. The feed from my birdhouse camera showed Karen's prize-winning roses slide into the darkness, followed by her entire back patio. Then came a sound that I felt more than heard. A low, guttural groaning of stressed wood and tortured metal. On the screen, I saw the corner of her house, the one she had called her million-dollar view, sag downward. It seemed to hang there for an impossible second, a moment of suspended physics before the foundation underneath it gave way completely. With a final, explosive crack, the entire back third of her home, the sunroom, the master bedroom, the gleaming white kitchen, tore away from the main structure and collapsed into the churning black surf. The camera feed flickered and went dark, as the collapsing debris must have severed the power lines. The water surged into my own yard, but it behaved differently here. The remnants of my old drainage slope, combined with the deep sand anchors that the demolition crew had been too lazy to dig out, did their job. The water washed over the broken ground, but it didn't have the same violent undercutting force. It flooded my lawn and lapped at my patio steps, but my house stood firm. The engineering, even the ghost of it, had held. By sunrise, the water had receded, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. The coastline had been redrawn. Where Karen's beautiful rental property had been, there was now just a jagged hole and a pile of splintered lumber on the beach below. The 2 neighboring homes were still standing, but one had a back wall ripped open, and the other was leaning at a dangerous angle. My yard was a mess of mud and seaweed, but it was intact. The officials arrived just after dawn: city inspectors, emergency management, and a team from the Coastal Management Office. They walked the line of destruction, their faces grim. They carried copies of Anita Ramos's report. They didn't need to investigate very hard. The evidence was a 50-foot-wide, gaping wound in the earth. That afternoon, the neighbor who owned the Ring camera came to my door. He was pale and shaking. "Frank," he said, holding out his phone, "you have to see this." He played the video. It was from the peak of the surge, time-stamped 3:14 a.m. You could see the water flooding the street, and then you could hear the scream. It was Karen Duvall, standing in her driveway in her pajamas, illuminated by the headlights of her car. She wasn't looking at the ocean. She was staring at the space where her house used to be, and she was shrieking a single soul-shattering phrase over and over. "Why did we remove that wall? Why did we remove that wall?" It was a full confession, screamed into the storm. The city's preliminary report was released within 48 hours. It was brutal and direct. The HOA was found guilty of authorizing an unauthorized demolition of a critical piece of coastal infrastructure. They were cited for gross negligence in destabilizing the bluff. And the report specifically named Karen Duvall and Ann Lasky as the originators of a forged city document used to justify the action. The fallout was immediate. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped them. Civil lawsuits from the other damaged homeowners started being filed. But the final shoe dropped a week later. I was out in my yard, clearing debris, when one of the other board members, a quiet man I barely knew, walked over. He handed me a small, unmarked USB drive. "I couldn't live with it," he said, not meeting my eye. She had Ann edit the minutes from every meeting to support her side. "This drive has the original recordings and the doctored transcripts. You should have it." As he walked away, a formal-looking sedan pulled up in front of Karen's house, what was left of it. A man in a suit got out and handed her an official envelope. Even from 100 feet away, I could read the return address. It was from the district attorney's office. It wasn't just about money anymore. A criminal inquiry had been opened. The emergency HOA meeting was held not in the clubhouse, which was being used as a staging area for disaster relief, but in the high school gymnasium. The mood was grim, a mixture of fear, anger, and exhaustion. Every single seat was filled. When Karen Duvall walked to the microphone at the center of the basketball court, there was no applause, only a heavy, expectant silence. She looked smaller, diminished, stripped of her blazer armor and defiant smirk. She held a single piece of paper, her hands shaking so badly you could see it from the back bleachers. I have an announcement to make," she began, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that echoed in the cavernous room. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as president of the Homeowners Association." She took a shaky breath, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. I deeply regret the decisions that were made leading up to this tragedy." A man in the front row shouted, "Decisions? You mean the crimes?" The dam of civility broke. The room erupted in a chorus of angry shouts, accusations, and questions. She didn't try to answer. She just stood there, taking it all in, her face pale. She crumpled the resignation letter in her fist, dropped it on the floor, and walked away from the microphone without another word. A ghost, leaving the scene of her own haunting. That was the last time most of us saw her in person. Her public downfall was just the beginning. The legal and financial consequences came down like an avalanche. The city of Oakhaven, facing its own liability for not stopping the demolition, fined the HOA a staggering $2.1 million for unauthorized structural interference and reckless endangerment of a protected coastal bluff. The two neighbors whose homes were damaged filed a civil suit, not just against the HOA, but against Karen Duvall personally. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Anita Ramos's report, my video documentation, the original meeting minutes from the USB drive, showing she had overruled safety concerns, and most damningly, the Ring camera footage of her screaming confession into the storm. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable proof, her lawyers advised her to settle. The court found her civilly liable for the full extent of the property damages. Her million-dollar rental dream was gone, swallowed by the sea, and now the rest of her assets were being liquidated to pay for the nightmare she had created. My own settlement was far more modest. The HOA's collapsing legal fund paid out $186,000 to cover the full cost of demolition, cleanup, and the reconstruction of my seawall. I didn't want a penny more than what was fair. This was never about a payout for me. It was about making things right. The first person I called after the check cleared was Anita Ramos. "Anita," I said, "I have the funds, but I don't want to rebuild the old wall. I want to build a better one." We spent the next month at my kitchen table with her laptop and my old drafting tools. We designed a new seawall, one reinforced with modern materials and techniques, with a deeper foundation and a more efficient drainage system. When the new construction crew arrived, they weren't the brutish thugs from before. They were a professional team recommended by Anita, and they treated the project with the respect and precision of engineers, not wreckers. As they worked, something else began to rebuild: the community. The old HOA board was dissolved in disgrace. A new election was held, and this time, the people who ran weren't interested in power. They were interested in safety and common sense. A young couple who had lost their back deck, a retired Army veteran who understood chain of command and accountability, and two other longtime residents formed the new board. Their first official act was to vote unanimously to hire Anita Ramos as a permanent engineering advisor to review all future structural and landscaping changes within the community. The reign of aesthetic tyranny was over. Science was now in the rulebook. A few months later, the new wall was finished. It was stronger, cleaner, and more elegantly designed than the original. It didn't just protect my property, it reinforced the entire section of bluff, making everyone safer. One quiet evening, I stood on the edge of my lawn, looking out at the rebuilt bluff line. The setting sun cast a warm glow on the fresh concrete. Anita came and stood beside me. We watched the gentle waves roll in for a few minutes in comfortable silence. "You know," she said finally, "they could have just listened." "Yes," I said, "they could have." I thought about Karen, Ann Lasky, and the arrogant belief that they could bend reality to their will with forged papers and loud voices. They held votes, they quoted bylaws, they made rules. But they forgot the one rule that matters more than any other on a coastline. They voted against science. The ocean voted back.